¿Qué tal? Muy buenas noches. Te saluda Genaro Lozano. Bienvenido a Foro Global, programa de Foro TV especializado en temas internacionales. Noche de conversaciones globales, noche de viernes. En esta ocasión me acompaña Kara Owen. Ella es directora para las Américas de la Oficina de Exteriores del Reino Unido. Vamos a conversar, desde luego, sobre la relación con México, pero también sobre la relación del Reino Unido con el continente americano. No te vayas, no le cambies. Esto es Foro Global. Regresamos en breve. Gracias por acompañarnos esta noche de conversaciones globales de viernes. En esta ocasión con Kara Owen. Ella es directora para las Américas del Ministerio de Asuntos Exteriores del Reino Unido, cargo que ostenta desde agosto del 2016. Previamente fue jefa de misión adjunta en la Embajada Británica en París, en Francia, y también en la de Hanoi, en Vietnam, así como jefa para diversidad y equidad en el Ministerio. También fue secretaria privada del Secretario de Asuntos Exteriores entre el 2003 y 2005. Kara Owen, welcome to Foro Global, welcome to Mexico.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm really happy that you're here. I always start with personal questions, and in your case, I usually do the same. I like to know who's seated next to me. And in your case, what moved you to become a diplomat? Why did you decide suddenly that you wanted to be representing the UK abroad?
So I think when I was at university, I was really passionate about history. That's what I did at university. And I was also motivated to do something that wasn't just about profit. I also love travel, language, different types of food.
You speak perfect French, by the way.
Well, that's very kind. And when I put that all together, it pointed me towards diplomacy. But it wasn't a profession that I knew very well. I hadn't come across many diplomats before it came into my head. It was my history teacher that suggested
No family?
No family, I hadn't come across them at all. But it was this idea of being somebody who worked on behalf of your country right across the world that really appealed to me.
Are you a Londonite? Were you born in London?
I'm absolutely not from London. I'm from the north of the country, in the Lake District, quite a rural area, quite a poor area. So that was one of the reasons why I hadn't come across many diplomats before.
Wow, and from there you decided that you wanted to live abroad and representing your country everywhere, no?
Exactly.
I was reading, before preparing for this interview, I was reading a blog by the Foreign Office, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, in which there's a quote in which you say, quoting a colleague, a female colleague, that senior women shouldn't make their jobs look too hard, or younger women won't want to do them.
Yeah.
You're a working mom.
I'm a working mum.
Isn't it hard for you to be a working mom, traveling abroad and being one of the top positions of the Foreign Office?
So
What's your secret?
Well, I think everybody has their own challenges, don't they? Everybody is, the working part of them is only one bit, and they have lots behind them. They may be caring for elderly parents, they may be caring for children. I'm very lucky. I have a really supportive husband who also works. And the more senior you get, the more help you get as well, which is one of the reasons that I want to make sure that I never make it look too hard. In a sense, the women that are the people that I really admire are the single parents that are working on low income. They're the ones that I think have it really tough.
Do you identify yourself as a feminist?
Yes.
Yes. What would be your advice to other women who want to join the foreign service of their own countries, like the Mexican Foreign Service, for instance?
So I would say go for it. I think if you have passion and interest in international affairs, go for it. The other thing that I would tell my younger self is, it took me a long time to realise that the most effective way to be a diplomat is to be yourself. So don't copy the models that you see. There may not be anything like you. You are best when you're the best version of you.
And the Great Britain, the United Kingdom is magnificent and showing who they are, and especially when talking about soft power. Britain is back again to the #1, the leading position in the world, according to one of the most important rankings, despite the Brexit and despite the fact that Britain is kind of, for the rest of the world, retreating itself from its international alliances such as the European Union. How do you do it?
So I think #1, I wouldn't agree with you that we're retreating from the world. I think Brexit is also about our ambitions to be out in the world. That's one of the reasons why we're so interested in our relationship with Mexico. We are a global operator and we want to stay like that. I think Britain, the soft power index also draws on Britain's significant strengths. I think the world over people know our football, our music, our literature, our art, our journalism, something that we're really proud of, the BBC. So I think we've got a lot of strengths as a nation that we have brought to and shared with the world that I think are appreciated.
You also have terrific ambassadors, such as our friend Duncan Taylor,
Yeah.
who has been a magnificent ambassador to the UK. And I know that he's retiring soon, and that he has been very happy witnessing, as a privileged witness of the current history of Mexico, this administration that is about to leave. He's coming to the show very soon, but I wanted to ask you, it's an exciting moment to be in Mexico. We just had a presidential election. What are your expectations of the next administration for the bilateral relationship?
So I think at the moment we're in a really strong position, and there are deep roots to what makes the UK and Mexico be such great partners. I think over years and decades we have had a very similar outlook on a whole range of issues, values issues, trade, and I fully expect that to continue. I think it's an exciting time. One of the reasons I came to Mexico now, I came for the Pacific Alliance Summit, but I was really pleased to be here so that I could catch up with the really significant election results and work out what that's going to mean for the two of us, and I am really excited.
You were in Vallarta, in Puerto Vallarta, at the summit of the Pacific Alliance, which is an alliance, a regional alliance in the Americas between some Latin American countries. Where is the UK participating as an observer of this mechanism?
So I think the alliance itself is very interesting. Again, the countries in the alliance got together because they shared values. They have a very strong commitment to trade and to openness. They also happen to have similar views on international issues as well. So I think it's a really important grouping for the UK to be alongside and be partnering with.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because we were just talking about the Brexit, no? And the UK people decided to vote for the Brexit, and then you come and your foreign diplomats go everywhere and they see these regional integrations everywhere, not such as the Pacific Alliance, but also Mercosur, which also attended, some of the dignitaries of Mercosur attended this summit, and they're also talking about integrating the whole region. Yeah. As well with the TPP, and then we have the renegotiation of NAFTA in North America as well. How do those foreign diplomats see these mechanisms of integration while Britain is, I would say also again retreating, but you said you don't agree with that? Yeah.
No, I don't agree with that. I think we've got very, very broad interests across the world. And I think each country is in charge of its own destiny. So just as your recent election was a really impressive example of democracy, our referendum, we asked the people what they wanted, and that is what they chose. And that's the path that we're pursuing now. I think one thing you won't see is us turning away from global issues. We will not be turning away from global trade. We'll be running towards it. That's what the government ambition is.
And some of the other values that the UK stands for, like globally, you know, like climate change and defending diversity. And we'll talk more about those issues in the next section. But let me talk a little bit more about Mexico and the upcoming administration and what your expectations are. Have you been were you able to talk to some of the next foreign officials of the next administration in Vallarta? I know that Jade Korpolensky was there, who's a woman who's very close to the next president of Mexico. She runs the Morena party. I heard that Marcelo Ebrard was supposed to be there, the next foreign ministry of Mexico, but I don't know if he was there at the end.
Yes, so I missed Senor Ebrard. I had left Puerto Vallarta at the end of the Observer Day before he arrived. But our team here in Mexico obviously are reaching out to the incoming team. I think the way that the transition going is really interesting. I think it's very sort of well organised, and there's clearly a lot of communication between the current administration and the incoming administration, which is really impressive. And that also supports our engagement with the incoming government. But I know the embassy team here and Duncan himself has met and will be meeting members of the incoming administration. Sure.
Mexico and the UK are also renegotiating a free trade agreement, the global accord with that has Mexico with the European Union. Yes. And now that the Brexit occurred, what is going to happen between the bilateral relationship between Mexico and the UK in terms of commerce and the political agreements that we also have since 2000, I think?
Yes. Yeah. So I think what's really clear is that both the Mexican government and we want to make sure that our businesses don't experience any kind of gap in all of the underpinning that we have to make our trade and economies work well together. So that's what we're working with the Mexican government on, and we fully expect to see a smooth transition. I think both countries have been shown themselves to be really ambitious around trade, and I would expect that to continue.
Is Mexico one of your top priorities in the Western Hemisphere?
Yes, so Mexico is one of our strategic partners, and it's the breadth and the depth of our relationship that is really quite special. Our government announced last week that we're also starting a consultation with our businesses and with our people about a number of new free trade agreements, including the CPTPP that Mexico has been a leading member of, and one of the countries that really made sure that after the TPP came to an end, there was a kind of successor and another grouping. So we're interested in that grouping. We're going to ask our businesses what they think of that, but I think that's really exciting.
We also have a very strong educational cooperation and agreements. A lot of Mexican students go to the UK every year to do either undergraduate or graduate studies. There was recently an exhibition in London of Frida Kahlo, the museum, and agricultural exchanges. It's important. Do you think that we should do something more? Do you want to make it to have more Mexican students there, to have British students also here?
So I think Mexican students add a huge amount, and also I think the more student exchanges you can get in both ways, the better. I know that the number of Mexican PhD students, so the people that are really at the top of their game in terms of research that come to the UK and do their postgraduates there, is one of the highest. I think there's a growing interest in coming to study in the UK, and that can only benefit both of us. And I'm really looking forward to seeing, there's a huge interest and affection for Mexico in the UK. You get lots of tourists, UK tourists in Mexico. We're excited by your food, we're excited by your countryside, we're excited by your deep history and culture. So I think whatever we want to do, there's a really big appetite on both sides.
To do more, no? Let me just make a very brief pause, and when we come back we'll talk more about the relationship between the UK and the US, of course, because you're also head of the Americas division of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and the US is also in the Americas. So we have to talk about the recent visit of President Trump to your country, and also about other issues such as the Nicaraguan political crisis and how the UK is seeing that. Let me just make a very brief pause and we'll be back. Hacemos una muy breve pausa. Después de esta sigo en esta conversación con Kara Owen. Ella es directora para las Américas de la Oficina de Exteriores del Reino Unido. Regresamos. Muchas gracias por continuar con nosotros en Foro Global. Estamos de regreso en esta conversación global de viernes con Kara Owen, es directora para las Américas de la Oficina de Exteriores del Reino Unido. Kara, you just had a very important visit in the UK, a visit that was also very polemical and very criticized by public opinion, and that was President Trump visiting the UK. We saw and we followed the news, and we saw the demonstrations of the people on the London streets, but we also saw a good relationship between the Queen and President Trump, even though there was also some, and it went viral on social media, the fact that President Trump didn't go with the diplomatic tradition of letting the Queen first, and etc. No, but how would you consider the relationship between Britain and the US now, especially thinking in the context of how bad the relationship looks to be between the US and the rest of Europe? So
the relationship with the US is and has been for centuries one of our most important. I think in economic terms we are the biggest investors in each other's economy. Every morning in the US, 1 million Americans get up and go to work in a company that's only there because of British investment, and the same is happening in the UK from US investment. And also on security, we've been partners in security for decades. We do more on security together than any other two nations. Our militaries know each other really well. They have fought together in defence of freedom many times. We've got a really strong shared history. So it totally makes sense for us to have the best relationship with the US that we can. And I think what the President saw when he came to the UK last week kind of has some of those elements in it. He met some investors in the United States from UK companies, and also American companies that are active in the UK. And I think he saw in a very graphic way through that how interlinked the economies are and how fruitful it is to both countries. And then he also saw our militaries exercising together. It was he saw a UK military exercise in which some US military took part. And that was showing the very best of what the UK does on the defence side. And then he and the Prime Minister had some really detailed talks and a lunch where they talked about some of the international issues that are really concerning to both of us, including the terrible situation in Yemen and how there can be a political solution there. They talked about Russia. He was just about to go off and meet President Putin. So I think overall, and then he saw the Queen, of course, as you mentioned. So that was the shape of the visit. There were protests. People didn't necessarily agree that it was a good thing to do. That's part of being in a democracy. Everybody has the right to say what they want in the UK, which is something I think that American colleagues understand really well.
You had those kind of protests also when George W. Bush was president and because of the Iraq war, but then with Obama everything seemed to be back to normal. No? The two countries were again very good friends, and you apparently had no big issues on the agenda. But what do we make of the fact that Chancellor Angela Merkel and President Emmanuel Macron have said publicly that the US is no longer a reliable partner and that Europe seems to be on its own? Because after hearing you, it seems that with the UK everything is good and there's no major issues or no problem. But if you hear those recent declarations, and again Merkel has said it twice already, it seems that with Europe there's like a big gap or something happening between the transatlantic relationship, but apparently UK is not part of that.
So I think from where we sit, it is really important that countries that share the same values stick together. The world is unpredictable. We can see threats and dangers. I think for decades, since the Second World War, we have been more prosperous, more peaceful as we have stuck together. So I think we think there is a lot of merit in making sure there's a very strong transatlantic relationship. I think, as you mentioned, there have been some very sort of big moments recently at the NATO summit where the President said what previous US presidents have said before, which is Europe, you've got to pay for your defence, you've got to pay more towards your defence. That's not the first time any US president has said that. They have said that many times before. He said it in a different way. He said it in a way like President Trump. But he, like every country, sticks up for what they believe to be their national interest. And then there are issues around trade, where the President is obviously looking at the set of relationships they inherited and working out which ones he thinks really work for the country. I think what's really important is that we continue transatlantic dialogue across a whole range of issues. There is still far more that unites us than will ever divide us.
I have to keep on going on the next issues of the Western Hemisphere agenda, and one of them, probably one of the most important ones of the hot topics in discussion, especially at the Organization of American States, is the political situation in Nicaragua. The UK has always been an observer, an important ally also of the Latin American countries. How are you seeing the situation now with President Ortega claiming that he's going to stay in power till 2020 and that he's not going to stop what's happening? But also there's also talks with civil society. What is the role of the UK in that crisis? Are you worried about it?
Yes, of course it's worrying when you see that number of deaths. You know, how can you stand by and not be worried by that level of violence? And our ministers have called for a halt in the violence and to make exactly the right conditions so that you can have a proper dialogue. There are clearly strong feelings there, and the only way that you can get through something like that is with meaningful dialogue. But the violence has to stop. I think we would support the efforts of those organisations that are there supporting the dialogue, including the church, including the Americas organisations, and I would encourage them, we would encourage them and support them in whatever way we can.
In sharp contrast, there's hope that things could change in Cuba with the new president and the call for a new constitution and even talking about gay marriage and more democracy and more freedom for the people. How is the UK following the situation in Cuba?
So we've been following that really closely. I think it's a really interesting kind of development. I was in Cuba about a year ago, and it is really clear that there is very strong interest from across the world, from Europe, from the UK, to be a partner with Cuba. They have some great strengths, really kind of interesting areas of collaboration. There are some things that we don't agree with and haven't, but we have always been advocates of kind of economic partnership and being there as they're going through their transformation. And our companies are interested too.
Sure. Venezuela is another hot topic.
Yeah.
It has been a hot topic ever since 2008, more or less. But what do you see as a political situation, as a political solution of the political crisis in Venezuela? Do you think that the situation could be better, or could be also in the Organization of American States? There have been a lot of condemns of the Mexican government, the Grupo de Lima, calling the Venezuelan president also to stop the repression of his oppositors and etc. How the UK is seeing this conflict, and how can it help to change the situation there?
Yeah, so lasting solution to all these things will only come from the Venezuelans themselves. I think we have been watching with real sadness what has happened in the country. Some of the humanitarian issues around health, around nutrition, the large numbers of Venezuelans, very talented Venezuelans that are leaving their country and moving across the Americas, settling in all kinds of different countries because they cannot stand the situation in Venezuela. It's really kind of tragic. So we have consistently called for political dialogue, and again having exactly the right conditions to have meaningful dialogue. There's no point in having dialogue if it's not truly meaningful and has a chance of going somewhere. We have consistently called for that. We have, as members of the European Union, applied sanctions to individuals, and I think that is the position that we've got.
Are you receiving more requests of political asylum or refugees from Venezuela? Mexico is, ever since it has become more vocal in the Organization of American States and calling for the Venezuelan president to stop the repression, and we have doubled the requests for political asylum. Is the UK also receiving more?
So I think it's more of a regional phenomenon, and I know it's impacting countries right across the region. I think we have been talking to the governments that are most affected, in particular Colombia. They have an awful lot of people just over the border, and we've been looking at how we and other members of the international community can support that situation.
Sure. In the 1980s, Argentina and the UK had a war. They had a conflict, a military conflict, because of the Islas Malvinas, or Falkland Islands, as you call them in the UK. What's happening today? What's the status of the situation? Is there still a conflict? I remember President Cristina Fernandez took that issue to the Organization of American States in several occasions, also to the UN. But I haven't heard the President Macri saying anything about the Falkland or Malvinas Islands. What's the situation now? What's happening?
So I think the situation of both countries around sovereignty hasn't changed. I think both countries are very certain in what they think about that. We are very confident of our sovereignty in the Falkland Islands, mainly because it's driven by the wishes of the Falkland Island people. But I think since President Macri came to power, Argentina is a country with which we share so much. We share so many values. We've got a deep history of support for and integration in Argentina's economy. There are really strong supporting and cultural links, and that is kind of the majority of the relationship. And since President Macri has been there, we have been working with the Argentine government to make sure that we're properly focusing on feeding and growing that side of our relationship, while being sort of respectful of each other's positions on the Falkland Islands.
We're about to end the conversation. Time runs up very, very fastly, but I have to change the topic because in Mexico there's a recent discussion about conversion therapies for LGBT people. Mexico hasn't banned those therapies yet, and some countries such as Brazil have done it, California in the US, and the UK it's about to do that as well. And that goes very closely with the values that the foreign diplomacy of the UK is trying to push in the world. Why is it important to push an LGBT global agenda of rights for LGBT people and women around the world for the UK?
So it's what we fundamentally believe in our core, and we think that unless everybody in society has a chance of being themselves, we will not get fulfilled, prosperous, free, comfortable societies. We really believe that very strongly, and you will find our ministers talking passionately about it.
Going to Pride demonstrations, your ambassadors?
Well, exactly, and I think the Pride here in Mexico City is a really joyful occasion.
There was a huge sign of your embassy.
A huge sign, really
by
great
the Angel,
sign.
yes.
And the bus, I think you had the Love is Great bus. So I think that is, you know, these are things about people. And I think it's one of the great kind of cornerstones of the relationship that we've got with Mexico, that we believe in progressing rights in our own countries, out in the world, and it's one of the things that makes the relationship so fruitful.
Thank you for doing that. And one last question. I will go back to personal questions. What are you going to be reading tonight when you take the plane back to the UK? What do you have next to your bed? What a recommendation of a novel, fiction, or whatever you're reading?
So I spend most of my time reading work documents, so I cannot wait to go on holiday, which is when I indulge my love of literature. I've got a stack of books this high, and the Man Booker shortlist came out, so I'll be picking some of those to take with me. But also I've got 2 kids, as you mentioned, 6 and 8, and they love reading with me, and they are big fans of Harry Potter. They're not allowed to watch the films until they have read the books, and they really love it, and we love the fact that it's a family thing that we do together.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview.
A pleasure,
and,
it's really good.
Welcome. I hope that you come back to Mexico soon.
So do I.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias por habernos acompañado esta noche en Foro Global. Soy Genaro Lozano. Te invito para que continúes con la programación de Foro TV. Yo te veo el domingo en punto de las 11 de la noche para una mesa de debate sin filtro, y el próximo lunes a las 11 de la noche de nueva cuenta para Foro Global. Por lo pronto, muy buen fin de semana.